All right, welcome to another edition, another episode of New Wine Uncorked. And as always, we're stoked to be here with you today. There's a lot going on in today's culture, as always. I mean, the American culture seems to have a lot of excitement, a lot of energy throughout the years, and this year's no exception. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, New Wine Uncorked is part of the YouTube video series that New Wine has, where we have a couple of different series: New Wine Tastings, New Wine Table Talks, and New Wine Uncorked. And you can find all of these video series and these episodes, the recorded episodes and past episodes, right here on the YouTube page. And just go right on up to that right side, the top of the page, and hit subscribe. And that way, anytime New Wine uploads any of our content, you will be informed. And then finally, at the end of this month, just to put this on your calendar, February 26th and 27th, New Wine is presenting a conference on mental health called Building Bridges, Not Walls. And in light of COVID-19, the racial injustice and unrest in our society, and many things that are going on, this has been a strain on so many of us and our psyche and our mental stability. And so we're going to have a conference to talk about this, to really dialogue, just like New Wine does, building bridges in contemporary culture through Jesus. And it's a relational endeavor, and this is why we do this together. And so just like Uncorked today, what we'll be talking about is what does it mean to be then a Christian in 21st century? Last week, we talked about suffering and authenticity and artificiality of Christianity. And this week, we're continuing this talk. We're actually going to start this new process because Phil and Tony and myself all have pastored or are pastors right now. And our goal just is what we wanted, just like Jesus, is to have the church, how is it that the church participates, is actually involved in today's culture. So today, the Christian today, the topic today is the Christian today, insurrectionist or incarnationalist. The message of Christianity follows this dude who is God, became a baby, was born, and then lived this life. So, and it was an incarnational life. He incarnated the truth of love incarnated. And you look around, gentlemen, you guys have seen the news, and we're all part of this, the impeachment trial going on of former President Trump, and around the events of January 6th. And how is it that Christians are to react to this, or what would be our response? Because in some sense, first century Jesus could be called an insurrectionist, came and disrupted the way of life. But was that disruption the same as the disruption that we see going on? Because a lot of folks that are tied to the right side of the political spectrum also have close ties to the evangelical church. So, gentlemen, what is the take? The Christian today, is the Christian following in the footsteps of Jesus and being incarnational, or is the way in which the church presents its message very much insurrectionist, and that it's so disruptive that people feel as if we're storming the capital of their hearts? What's your take on that?
I have a couple of takes right off the bat. Just thinking about sometimes how we do evangelism, how we reach out to people that are not of our faith, and how it turns into a fight. It turns into I have beliefs that are just smarter than yours, that aren't just saying. I guess I want to say that our belief we want to say is life changing. We want to say that our beliefs capture your heart, kind of thing. And rather than using that as a perspective as we evangelize, we kind of come and just try to dominate and give the smarter views and dismissing other folks and whatnot. So that's the way that we communicate the gospel, that sometimes it's far more insurrectionist than it is incarnational. And yeah, at the same token, now what you said, Matt, though, with Jesus being an insurrectionist, I get that. I get the idea there, but at the same token, he wasn't necessarily leading a violent mob anywhere. And in fact, at some tokens, even said, hey, don't pick up the sword at all. But I understand when it comes to a matter of thought, Jesus definitely brought things to the table and things to our beliefs that challenged his day, the religious leaders of his day, that challenged to the core their beliefs and understandings about God. So there are a lot of ways you could say that there was an insurrection that was happening there, but it was a way that was trying to just overtake people's hearts far more than overtake a political system. So
yeah. Religion News just released an article how they talked about more than a quarter of white evangelicals believe in the core QAnon conspiracy theories. So whatever the core central primary conspiracy theories that make up QAnon, more than a quarter of white evangelicals hold to those conspiracy theories. So we have these lies shaping the understanding of reality and faith and culture and society and church and politics for more than a quarter of white evangelicals. And evangelicals by far make up a huge chunk of what we would call American Christianity, or now American Christianities. I think for us, we talk about, or growing up for me in a evangelical conservative milieu and environment, I was always told that postmodernity and relativism are the greatest enemies of the faith, because the minute you dabble in post-mo philosophy and relativity, everything becomes unmoored and you will have no sure foundation upon which you can rest your faith. When everything becomes relative, there's no objective standard of truth. But what I find continually is that the very people who accuse postmodernity of relativity, they are guilty of the very thing that they try to tear down or attack. They continually redefine what it means to be persecuted and to be subjected and oppressed. And so you have this conflation where, how do I say, people who are not oppressed believe that they are oppressed. And so it leads to insurrectionist behavior.
Yeah.
And
isn't that
no,
no?
yeah.
I was gonna because isn't that what Phil, you were kind of hinting at or discussing last week? When folks feel as though it's not a sharing of power, they feel as though they're losing power, you know. And so, Tony, I don't know if that's what you're kind of talking about, is that the white evangelicals, it's not even as their persecution is feeling as if they're being pushed out of power. And so they're redefining it. And when I say they're, I mean, I would have to be lumped into this group simply because of affinity of being white. And, you know, people like me have been in leadership for the evangelical church. So is that what you're talking about? It's like there's this fear. Yeah. So it raises up. So is that a proper response from a Christian, though, if they feel like their values or I guess I'm wondering, what is it that that folks who would be a part of the insurrectionist or even evangelical church, what is being taken away?
Right, because I mean, I liken it to the Me Too and the Church Too movement, in the sense that it's a loss of privilege that feels like persecution. Because I have so many friends who support the Me Too and the Church Too movement, and then I have a smaller group of friends who feel like, well, let me say they're acquaintances then, who feel that Me Too and Church Too has gone too far. And they're like, well, if we start believing every woman that says she's been assaulted, how do we know she's telling the truth? And I'm like, man, that's indicative then of the very problem that Church Too and Me Too is trying to answer. If you're afraid of getting accused of sexual assault or abuse, doesn't that say more about your character than the person who abused you? Like, if you're afraid that, what if I get falsely accused? That's so unrealistic. And I feel that goes hand in hand. It is that power dynamic conversation. It's those in power continually change the metric or the goalpost. And it's, well, now I'm being persecuted. It's like, you're not being persecuted. You're just changing the metric to suit your narrative to say that you're being persecuted. And so I think all this talk about insurrection, it's like, you're not an insurrectionist. You have the privilege to go make a mess and then go home with no consequences. Some people are experiencing the consequences, but by far and large, like, this is the most like free loving insurrection I've ever witnessed, because everybody's like, here's your baton, here's your flag, go beat up a police officer and then go home. Like, what in the world? This is not. So I don't think we have a good grasp on reality if we're saying that this is the milieu we're living under.
Yeah, and in connection with that, Tony, being around violence, being around things that are truly, truly scary, for many folks, is totally unfamiliar. I mean, if my presence on an elevator could make someone scared, is one thing. Now, at the same token, if there's multiple acts of gun violence in your neighborhood, that's a whole nother level of scary. And if you're a person that's never been in either of those situations, you may not know what being scared is. But at the same token, thinking of the civil rights movements of the 1960s and the violence and the dogs and fire hoses that was unleashed on the people out there that were partaking in sit-ins, that were intentionally, kind of attracting that because they knew that was going to happen, in contrast to the things we saw just last summer. There is some similarities. There's also some differences. The things that we were seeing from our police wasn't necessarily merciless in the same sense that it was in the 1960s, but the thought is still the same. These bodies aren't as important, so maybe now it's like, okay, well, just let them stand there. Let them stand there and yell what they have to yell. They'll go away, and we'll get things back to normal when they're gone. Versus, we need to get them out of here so we can get things back to normal. There's a different take, but the essence of the movement becomes still the same. So yeah.
Yeah, and do you think what is the draw? Because I've been trying to figure out too what the draw is for folks who are of religious backing to be okay with even. So let's say they weren't pro insurrection, but they are okay with it in the sense that not many. I haven't seen Franklin Graham or any one of these folks that were talking during Trump's presidency talking against this, saying, okay, fine, you can have, let's say, an uprising, but when it becomes violent and when it becomes destructive, then this is a level that's too far, because like, I take your point, Phil, to even use the language of insurrection with Jesus, is that even going too far? Is that trying to take over, accommodate the language to just to be edgy, right? Because Jesus came in and he wasn't violently trying to overthrow the government, right? So in one sense, it's not that I think, or at least I'm not saying that people shouldn't stand up. If they really believed that the election was stolen, I believe the civil process allows for then people to contend with that. The contention is not to throw down a hammer and say, we didn't get what we want, so now we're going to throw a fit. Because I think the biggest question I always have is, if the white evangelicals are okay with the insurrection at the Capitol, how could they not have been the biggest supporters then of the Black Lives movement? Because the Black Lives Matter movement was all about standing up to oppression and things, and the fact that their freedoms are stolen. So what is the misunderstanding, or where's the disconnect between those who felt that the election was stolen and then not being able to even understand what Black Lives Matter is about? And then vice versa. Do folks that are adamantly for Black Lives Matter, are they able to step back and go, well, I can see where they're coming from. maybe misguided and misdirected. And are we even at that point where both sides can even step back and go, there might be an ounce, I don't agree with it, or I'm not quite understanding it, but I can see where they're coming from. Are we even at that point?
No, I definitely think we're not at that point. And I think the order of operations kind of go a little bit like this. Because those folks went out over the summer and did what they did, we feel like we can get out and do what we did in January. That's what I think the order went. It wasn't out of principle we can protest. It was like, well, they did it, so we get to do it too. And because we have the backing of someone more powerful, we're going to get our way. Or we perceive ourselves to be more powerful, being that we were able to push through when the defenses weren't nearly as strong as it was against the unarmed people over the summer. So that's where I think it's the whataboutism in that sense. They did it, so we did it too. And I think part of the issue is because we didn't see the fight back against the authority figures the way that we saw over the summer. People weren't pushing back against them. But at the same token, all of this being said, we're still in a bubble where authority, power, authority being taken away from me feels like I'm being persecuted. And that's the thing. It's all we're talking about. So the question that we posed at the beginning, where what are we losing, or what are people losing when they're losing power? It's just that. They feel like they're losing power and they're afraid of that. That's what I believe. I don't know, because I'm not losing anything in this fight, right? so I'm wondering what is the threat? And in a real sense, I would just like, I don't know even where to get that explanation. What is the real threat outside of saying, well, man, the most horrible thing right now is to be a white man because everyone's going to accuse me of this, that, and the next. But that's my existence forever. I mean, Emmett Till. We don't know what even happened in the situation with Emmett Till, because we can't believe the years apart of the testimony and then the confession that came out later on and whatnot. We don't know anything that happened there, but we knew that a black young man was accused of doing something, and that sparked the civil rights movement. So what do? Black men are constantly under the threat of being accused of something that they had nothing to do with at all, and people looking at them saying, hey, we know you're guilty of this, tell us what happened. And we're like, what are you talking about? I wasn't even there. So yeah.
It's so hard because our faith situates us to be peacemakers. It calls us towards unity. It calls us towards selflessness, self-sacrifice, and love. But what we've seen is people with power use that to abuse people without power. And it's hard because we use the same language, but the power and the access to that ideal is different for everybody. So while we may have similar end goals, who does that end goal apply to differs for everybody. I think if we were to take two populations and said, okay, what is the population of people who say blue lives matter, back the blue? And what's the population of the people who are present at the Capitol leading the insurrection and beating up police officers? If we took these two populations and we tried to make a Venn diagram, it would actually be just one circle. And that's the stark irony and the humor in all of this is, I find great difficulty in us trying to say, let's try to find common ground with people on the other side. Like as if, hey, if we can find common ground and we can have a good conversation, maybe you'll come to this side or we'll find a good place and then we can bring people in. But not to talk binaries, but I feel bound by binaries. I feel the sheep and the goats binary, because there is one side in word they may not want to persecute or oppress, but indeed they do. And so I'm all about keeping our people accountable and keeping the people that we call as a part of our same community or our same affiliation accountable. I believe that. But I don't necessarily believe in the flattening of distinctions for the sake of unity. And that's what I have a hard time, because I've been accused of saying evangelicals or white evangelicals are Nazis. And I don't want to call white evangelicals Nazi, but when there are core distinctions that lead to harmful actions and policies and contribute to white supremacy, if I'm not going to call evangelicals Nazi-like, how do I distinguish the harmful actions? How do I call out the harmful actions? Because we've seen it time and time again. For the sake of unity, we try to bring people who are actively hurting others back to common ground. But it doesn't work that way, or at least we haven't seen it work out well. So to be clear, I'm not saying white evangelicals are Nazis, but I am concerned by the rhetoric and the practice and the policies and the actions that contribute to white supremacy. But it just feels like white evangelicals are more upset that I would call them white supremacists than actually interrogating whether or not they're participating in white supremacy. Fine, I don't want to call anybody a Nazi, but you're more upset about that. I'm drawing out that analogy than you are about, maybe there are. I have a black friend, Tony. I'm not racist. Like, bro, I don't know.
Man, it's tough because just involving race in any conversation, it turns it into a powder keg. And just the moment you drop race in, you accuse someone of being racist, you accuse someone of actively participating in something. If it involves race, it's going to turn into, whoa, how dare you put me in that? I mean, you saw what happened way back in the 60s. That wasn't me. I didn't own any slaves. All those kind of things. And it's like, no, I just want you to be accountable for the stuff you did. No, just be accountable for stuff you did. Just be honest about who you are and how you think about people, how you think about me when I wander on the elevator. Just be accountable for that. And people don't want to think about that. But truth be told, we have people in our hearts that we look at and we're just like, yo, I don't want to be in a room with that person. For whatever reason, they look like Matt. You know, I don't want to be and you're like, and we don't want to account for that either, you know? And so that's one of the big things I think with all this is just simply being honest about how you feel. If you continue to lie to yourself and lie to everyone else about how you feel, we're never going to have any kind of progress. We're not going to have the moment where the king was asking for, where that moral conscience of each of us will be grabbed and say, whoa, I did this to a person, you know, where we can actually approach being brotherhood. But if we keep lying to ourselves, we're going to keep going back to our circles and never actually have a conversation.
So how does the church, because the church needs to be involved, you know, Bart said have one hand in the Bible, one hand in the newspaper. And I liken that today to, you know, one thumb scrolling on your news feed and the other, you know, thumb scrolling in the Bible, same thing. But so as we're raising up this next generation, you know, these teenagers now and these 20-somethings and, you know, folks in your realm, Tony and Bill, and with our kids, and with what is it though that because this is great, we continue to talk this, it shouldn't be this way. There's two different, there's the binary views, right? But so how do we then show or teach or embody what the church is supposed to be like? Because last week we were talking about the authenticity of embracing suffering, or the willingness to sacrifice. The literature throughout the Bible is constantly talking about this self-giving, this self-sacrifice for the sake of the other. And yet I'm wondering if the youth of today, when they look at the leaders, do they just see nothing but hypocrites fighting for power, or do they see like a legit remnant of people who are stepping in, who are called Christian, that truly are, oppressed for their willingness to stand up for the other. I was talking to a group the other day and I was saying, I'm wondering if when we get to heaven, God willing, that there's going to be more and I was talking to a group of evangelical leaders and I said, I wonder if we get to heaven, there's going to be more homosexuals in heaven than there are evangelicals. And they got more irritated about the fact that I would insinuate that a homosexual could be in heaven, as opposed to, like you were saying, Tony. But if what I'm pointing out has very similar similarities to, this white supremacy, I'm not calling you this, but if it looks like a duck and it smells like a duck and sounds like a duck and quacks like a duck, and so where's that disconnect though, like you're saying, Phil, about the honest reflection? Because is it that people who call themselves followers of Jesus are just not spending enough time with Jesus to where they're going inward and actually honestly reflecting? Or is the church not even asking folks to do that? Like, are we not teaching our young people, hey, you need to spend time with the master. You need to spend time with Jesus in order to have your heart, fully saturated in his love? Where is this disconnect that we're talking about? It almost feels like the evangelism that the church needs to do is within it, that we need to be evangelizing to those folks who believe that they're Christian, but have these white supremacist, nationalistic, hell-bent tendencies that don't even know that they're almost part of the lost. Like, so what is it that we would be teaching our youth, or do we even need to teach the youth that are growing up in this? Like, how is it that we change this? What we see, we have these competing forces under the same Lord, because those folks at the Capitol believe that they were doing the Lord's work. So I agree, dialogue doesn't happen when two parties aren't wanting to dialogue, because I think that's where we're at. So what is it though that folks that love Jesus, what's the next step? Like, do we focus on the youth who are in the church now? Is it twofold, so that we can then reach out to those who think they're Christian or were part of this, that they want this movement of anti or against the BLM? Like, so where is that the church finds itself? Because it seems like we're in this inner turmoil, kind of like a civil war within the church, but no one even is recognizing that. We just keep saying, oh, we need the two sides need dialogue. But like, I agree with you, so I don't think we're close to dialoguing. So what then, from our perspective, is the next step?
Oh man, a couple of things there. First off, I guess me and you, Matt, we're in our 40s. Tony, you're still in your early 20s, right? but but thinking back to the years ages ago when I was a teenager, there were a couple of things that helped me learn about culture that was a little interesting. So first off, all of the rap music I was listening to, Tupac, Biggie, that was the guys that were coming up. Those were the guys that I was listening to when I was in my teens and when I was the youth that was coming up. But also a thing that impacted me was going to Greater Solid Rock Church of God in Christ, just a couple of blocks from where I live now. And the thing that impressed me was not the conversation that was going on in the pulpit or the crazy, as some people would call crazy, acts of just church life within a Black Pentecostal church at the time. That happens still today. We do all the time. That can be life changing in some regard. But what impacted me was seeing a series of 7 men leading that church, and knowing in my neighborhood that there was only about, of all my friends that I grew up with, there was only one of us that grew up with the father, maybe 2, but it wasn't even a good situation that the father that they're growing up with. It was just a couple of us. But seeing that number of men leading that church, and they were there week in and week out, just their presence was something that spoke volumes to me. And knowing those men now, they have planted churches, they're in the city still, married to the wives that they were married to when they were first in that pulpit there too. Those things were really impactful to me. So I'm saying this to say, in regards to teaching the youth that's upcoming, they're far more watching us than they are listening to us, I want to say, because that's the way I was. So I imagine that the youth today are very similar in that regard. But at the same token, when I was working in a youth ministry just a few years ago, so probably 6-7 years ago, that having real, honest conversations with my youth was the thing that at least made our relationship stick. I was able to, for the youth I was able to hang out with, we had real, honest conversations about life. I told my story, the whole portion of my story, and that was able to stick for a lot of them. And those of us that were in that ministry at the time, having just honest conversations about what life is about, not the mask that we wore on Sunday, but just having honest conversations. Those were the things that stuck. So I'm hoping that there will be able to watch us be unified, grow in unity kind of thing, and they'll see and learn from that. But at the same token, when we talk to them about reality, I mean, that's the attraction that the gang members, the gang leaders have to the youth now, because they tell them the game and they tell them how it is. And they see what the youth see, kids see what's going on. And they're not going to take like a very deodorized version of what's happening, if we don't tell them the truth. So, yeah.
Yeah, Matt, to your point about what if in heaven there are more people who are of the LGBTQ community than there are evangelicals? Like, with the recent report that was released yesterday with the atrocities that Ravi Zacharias committed, it's like nobody, I have not seen one evangelical leader say, man, Ravi's probably in hell. Like, nobody questions his salvation. But a gay person passes away, man, shouldn't have been gay in this life. Like, the cognitive dissonance, I think our young people, they sniff it out. For me, I'm not worried about keeping the young people in church. I think the young people might be John the Baptist out in the wilderness pointing the way. I think our young people can smell integrity and what is hypocrisy, and then the Holy Spirit will take the rest. I think our young people have a keen sense and a keen nose for where truth is being told and where lies are being propagandized. And then from there, the Holy Spirit will lead them. I have no fear about the future of the church. I'm actually excited about a church that's built upon integrity and not upon power and positioning. I think for us, I wonder if for us, we are so enchanted and captivated by maintaining unity. And to some regards, I understand the selflessness of wanting to keep the Lord's church together and protect the Lord's church. But I wonder if we aren't just enabling bad behavior. And I think that's what I keep going back to. That's why with our young people, I'm not worried. I think, so to riff off of the theme of incarnationalist or insurrectionist, I think we do need to be a part of an insurrection. And the insurrection is this: the American church has participated in lifestyle and brand Christianity. We are on the market and we try to promote and proliferate our swag and say, this is how Christianity benefits your life on the market. And as you are going in, you're coming in and you're going, this is how Christianity makes you feel better and have a better life, and the like. And I think Christianity doesn't do that. Christianity is an insurrectionist movement because it wants to topple the market, because people are not commodities and Jesus is not a product. Our faith is not commodified. And if we're a part of any insurrection, it's the idea that we all should have access to the Lord through the Holy Spirit and through the cross. And that is not a product, and that cannot be a lifestyle. It is more than a lifestyle. And that's the insurrection we need to join. That's the move that the Holy Spirit would send to young people so that they can dream dreams and prophesy, so that Jesus tears down the temple and rebuilds it in 3 days, which is his body, and now the church. That's what Christians and the church need to do. It's that tearing down of whatever barrier wall. But I think for us, that's why the church falls into white supremacy, because the market the complex is built upon white supremacy. And so the church is a lifestyle brand. It benefits and proliferates off of that. And so I think our young people, we all have our shortcomings, but I am hopeful because of our young people. And then that is the only insurrection I will partake in, is the toppling of the market. Any other insurrection, I'm gonna have to ask for a permission slip.
I totally hear what you're saying, Tony, and I get that. My concern with that, the mentality that I think some Christians have is, yes, indeed, Jesus goes in and turns over the tables, but when we see something in culture that we don't like, then all of a sudden that comes out and says, "Ooh, we are insurrectionists. Jesus was a rebel. You know, we need to," and so then it gets tacked onto, and so it goes again to I absolutely agree with you. I think the insurrection that happened 2,000 years ago really was meant for this inner, this jihad, this holy war within. And so often I think the problem, because of our consumeristic mentality, is that when we see contention, when we see division, it's always because of the other, and not because that the Lord wants me to stop, pause, and really reflect, wait, am I creating this? I find it quite intriguing that it's the evangelicals who want us to trust the Lord in his sovereignty, and yet they're the ones who stand up and say, whoa, we have to be careful, because if a woman just says that there's an assault, we can't just allow that to be there. They don't trust the human enough that there's going to be honesty, that all of a sudden when you give this, it's like Augustine, love God and do what you want. And the church was like, oh, you can't tell people to live like they want because they're going to choose sin, even though you just said, love the Lord your God. So it's like, even the Christians don't believe that God's good enough for us to truly trust him, that other people are going to be good. We automatically label each other as the enemy, which, inevitably means that we see each other as evil. So when we even say we need to trust or we need to work with each other, there's always it's always under the air of suspicion, and so again, like, I even wonder if for the church these days that COVID is again pressing into it and saying, hey, in a week you're supposed to be preparing for arguably the greatest event in history, the killing of God, and then his resurrection, some 3 days later. Are we going to fast from our need for position and power? What does that look like for the church? Because as you were saying, I haven't seen anyone say anything about Ravi, but dude, when the Twin Towers were down, it was guaranteed, like, those people who had a part of that, they are in hell. Okay, we knew that, right? And it was the homosexuals, Falwell and these guys came about. And yet now when a Christian leader, it comes about with Driscoll, with the dude from Willow Creek, these guys, but we're all like, whoa, grace, mercy. They're just broken. Like, and yet if it's someone like a Black Lives Matter leader, all of a sudden they're evil. They can't be of us because, they're going. So again, that disconnect, but I'm wondering, so as we're talking, I agree with you. I'm not concerned about the youth. They can smell bullshit right straight away. We all know that. We were there, right? Because we were there looking at the adults. When is it that we as the adults, though, step in and realize what Jesus was saying is, let the children come to me, so that we can see their loyalty, right? They are loyal. Kids are loyal. I feel like it's when we get to be adults, when we start to step into the power game, that's when the disloyalty comes to one another, So are the church leaders, though, willing to, at least at what you're saying, Tony, not just look at the kids and not and feel comfortable? Are we willing to learn from them? Like, how do they take in all the social media and still relate to one another? And who are their examples? Phil, you and I, we the music of the day of the 90s and things, with that, the pushing into society standards, with Tupac, with Dr. Dre, with the rap music that was so condemned because it was like, oh, it was honest. It's the rock of the 60s and 70s, Martin Luther of the 1500s, the songs that they're writing, they were an honest reflection. Is the church willing to step back into that? Like, are you and me and Tony and other leaders, are we willing to embrace some of the the ethos of those younger than us and learn from them, because that's authenticity, and that's also a willingness to let go a little bit. Do we have leaders like that? You know, this is what we're going to continue to step into, like we were talking before. And so for those of you that are watching, think about this. Reach out to one of us, you know, and say, hey, I got this idea for the dialogue, or what about this? The questions that should be pressing into the church. And each week, for the next few weeks, we're going to continue with this discussion of who is the Christian today and what is his or her role on the world stage. And we'll be talking through some of these issues, especially with next week coming about, where we start Lent and the 46 days before Easter. And so what are we going into? What is this hope in the rising up, this resurrection life? What does that mean for today's culture? So as always, we're super stoked that you took time to join us. Feel free to then share this with your social networks and email us. Put it in the comments, questions that you have, because this is what we want: relational, building bridges in today's culture through Christ, leading by the Spirit, in asking questions, involving ourselves in each one of our lives. So on behalf of Tony and Phil, this is New Wine Uncorked. Until the next time, we'll see you on the flip side.